Hello, everybody. Good evening. It's 8 o'clock in California. Welcome to So Cal Loopers, our fourth meeting with Kenny Fox. This is a cool day because Nightscout is a very powerful tool. It's been around quite a while. Before I get there, I have to give you the disclaimer once again. Looping and do-it-yourself looping is at your own risk. It's your choice. You build your own application, you run it, and it is all up to you, and you understand the risks involved, and you choose what you choose. So there, everyone agree? Raise your right hand. We're good. Okay. Tonight we're going to talk about Nightscout. We are not. Kenny is.
No, it's a we. It's okay.
And what is it? Why do we need it? What's the latest version? Why do they call it funny names like ketchup? What do you have to do to run Nightscout, and how do you understand the settings? Also, what reports might you want to take to your doctor, if your doctor even cares? Mine doesn't, but if you want to dazzle them, what reports would you use? And then
we're going to talk about Nightscout. So I have a couple of notes on the slides. They're nothing fancy. We're mostly just going to be doing kind of a live review of some of this stuff, as well as a couple of pictures that I've taken of my Heroku site. So other than that, it'll be a lot of Q&A if you guys want, and we'll fill in the blanks from there. So what we're going to do is talk about Nightscout. What is it? So Nightscout is it's an open source website that was designed a long time ago to kind of do what Dexcom Share before Dexcom Share existed, right? That was kind of its main thing. It was created by a couple of parents trying to collect their either their own information, and then some of their parents jumped in to try to collect their kids' information, and they kind of wanted to manage everything in one place. So that's oversimplifying the history of Nightscout, but nonetheless, there it is. So as you can see, it's got CGM graph data here, but it also has other information you can log and record and look back on. So it can be used to do analysis, as well as just kind of capture like history, what your logbook sort of, but of cooler things like when you change your sensor last, or when you changed your pump site last, you can get warnings and things about that. But you can also see loop data kind of snapshotted in the past. So we're going to cover kind of all that. So it's been used for a lot more than it was originally intended. It's free, and you can set it up using the instructions in Loop Docs. Here under the Nightscout section of Loop Docs, you'll see all kinds of things about Nightscout. Most of this, all of it really is about Nightscout, but there's a whole bunch in here. Brand new Nightscout would be if you've never built one. This has good instructions. And a review of most of the stuff we're going to cover is in here, what these pills mean and all kinds of stuff is in Loop Docs. So Katie's done a great job capturing all of that. And then also what all the symbols mean inside the loop pill, stuff that's very specific to loop. So it's all here. If I skip over it, it's because it's well documented. If you have questions about it, I'll bring it up.
And it's actually much easier to use the instruction on Katie's on the stuff that Katie did in Loop Docs than using the Nightscout site, because there's just so many options in Nightscout.
Yeah, so Nightscout also exists here, and Nightscout.info has a bunch of documentation about Nightscout, and we'll bring this up later, but it's not as easy to come through as the kind of walkthrough that Katie's made in Loop Docs. So I encourage you to go there first. I actually send people who are just building a Nightscout into here to say, hey, ignore the stuff that says loop. That's how good this setup is. So the other place to know, good thing to know about Nightscout is it's kind of part of the what we kind of call the "we are not waiting" movement. So so when you see "we are not waiting," that was kind of one of the first pieces around that movement that sort of led into Loop and these other open APS and other systems. Are kind of collectively in here. But one thing you want to note is if you need some help, then one of the best places to go is the Facebook group CGM in the Cloud. That's where you can get Nightscout specific assistance, and usually around anything else that might connect to Nightscout. There's other apps that we as loopers don't use, like that I use personally, like Xstrip, which is another open source app for Android that can connect to Nightscout as a data source. and send information that way. So there's all kinds of other tools that connect to Nightscout, but we're going to focus on Nightscout itself and a little bit around how you get some loop data out of it.
Just real quickie for you, Kenny, just so that Wes doesn't have a heart attack, the
Yes.
actual saying is hashtag we are not waiting. They don't say we are not waiting. So
Sorry, hashtag. I wrote it down there. Sorry. Say it out loud. Thank you. Yeah, definitely catch me. Don't let Wes come after me. Okay, so we'll look over some of the same stuff mentioned in loop docs. These, the blood glucose is your pretty dots. That's like the most obvious thing you see when you're looking at Nightscout, right? You see all these dots. But one thing people don't always pay attention to is when you're setting up your Nightscout site, and we'll go over those settings a little bit, you do get to set your targets, these the numbers, the dots that turn different colors. So you have green is kind of what you consider your target high, your bottom and top, I think it's called. And then you have your high and your low. So anything between your target, which for us is 150 to 70, those are the target top and bottoms. Then I have the high set to 180. So that means all the dots in between 180 and 150 turn yellow. And I have our low, like urgent low, I forget what it's called, set to 55. So anything between 70 and 55 is yellow, but anything under 55 is red. So I encourage you to set these numbers up, maybe not super unrealistically. Some people like to set them really tight, like 80 to 110 or something like that, which is fine, but give yourself a little bit of leeway. People are comforted by seeing green. So figure out a good balance of how much green you want to see. But don't overdo it. Don't make it like 300 or something. Probably wouldn't be as good. But use the colors to inform you. So when you're looking at your graph, either in the big section here or across this 48-hour kind of mini graph on the bottom, these colors are meaningful to you to tell you something about where you are in terms of where you want to be, and where you might want to take a look at something that didn't go quite the way you wanted it to. So make those colors useful by setting your targets. So yeah, most obvious you can see it's capturing your CGM data. That's easy to see. You'll also notice very quickly that, especially with Loop, but you can also use other tools to log these, even straight up in Nightscout. You can see boluses and carb entries. You'll see that the boluses are blue half circles, like the bottom half. And the top half of the circle is white, which is carbs. You can do in Nightscout, you can actually, if you were manually entering some things, let's say you didn't have Loop and you wanted a tool to log all the stuff going on, like carbs and boluses, you could choose certain events in Nightscout that would actually make the one circle with the top half is white and the bottom half is blue. So just with Loop, they're always separated because they're independent entries. They don't have to be done together. So you can see that. And then you can see from a Loop perspective, the emojis you add in to your carb entries show up here as well. And then very Loop specific is if you hover over a carb entry, you can see the absorption time and what device entered it. But the absorption time is unique to Loop. You won't see this if you're using Nightscout by itself as a logging tool. But you can see it here as the absorption time listed here. You actually can't see it in the reports in Loop either. So unfortunately, the only place to see those right now is right here in just hovering over the carb icon or any part of the carb circle or the name up here, the 42 grams and the pictures. So if you have some entries kind of overlapping each other, if you can get your cursor on one little piece of the top there, you'll be able to see that hover over. There's a lot of things in Nightscout that are visible by tapping or hovering your mouse on. So make sure you're just doing that as you're clicking around to see what's going on. So with that, we'll move on to the pills, because that's kind of one of the things that are really important. So the pills are these little boxes up here. If you hover over things, you'll see different information. The easy ones are over here. You might hover over the cage or sage icons, which we'll talk about in a second, but they give you more information than what's readily available here. The one you guys should all know about because you're loopers is a loop pill. So assuming you have it turned on in Nightscout, you should be able to hover over it and you can see all kinds of information in here. So the loop pill will tell you, this little icon will tell you what's going on. that circle with the arrow you're seeing right now is everything's working great. You'll
why do
see
you call it a pill?
a pill. That's a good because it kind of looks like a Dr. Mario pill. It's kind of what I think of. It's not an uncommon term in web development or app development in general. We have little boxes of information. I don't know why that term stuck, but it's not unique to Nightscout. Let's put it that way. You probably won't be playing around with other applications and talking about the pills you see, but that's okay. So if you hover over the loop one, you'll see all kinds of stuff. It's basically a lot of the information that loop is sending back to Nightscout and be saved there. So the minimum and maximum, like of the prediction, what's the highest and lowest point in that prediction? How many carbs are on board, insulin on board, the last temp basal try to run, and where you're going to end up your eventual blood sugar. Everything about the prediction and everything loop's doing is in that pill at that moment in time that you're looking at it. So you can do that with all these pills. Let's go over those, but I realized I should probably do one more thing. So we talked about the mini graph at the bottom, and we have the main graph at the top. If you click or tap with your finger in the Nightscout app or on the website on your phone, you can tap and drag across the bottom. You can drag across the bottom and scroll backwards in time. And what that will do, kind of important and useful, even if you're not looping, using this tool. I used to use this without loop, and still a very useful tool. You can scroll back and you see this dotted line. Going vertically shows you where you are in time, but also you'll see this section over here says retro, meaning you're going backwards. And you'll see a line through it, just to let you know that it's not the active one you're looking at. Same with the blood sugar on this side. Tell you what time you're looking at and relative to your current time zone. So I'm looking at someone who's in the East Coast, by the way. Weird thing. Shows me my time, even though it's, it's weird. So 3 hours back from when their time is. But you can scroll backwards and look at history. So I'm surprised how many people don't know you can do this, but this lets you scroll backwards and you'll see that these pills will kind of change back to what they were at this moment in time, even the loop pill. So if you want to see what loop was sending at this moment in time, you can look by hovering over the loop pill and see what's going on. The cool thing also with loop is that purple or pink prediction line moves too as you scroll backwards. So this is a really important learning tool for you guys trying to understand what loop is doing. Because remember, like Katie says, it's all about the prediction line as to why loop's choosing to do what it's doing. So it's more useful to scroll backwards in Nightscout. You don't have this option in the loop app. You can go backwards every 5 minutes and look and see what loop's prediction was and see how it changes as things move, and then start to see what pieces might be affecting that. That's definitely unique to Nightscout, and probably one of the main reasons why I would encourage someone who is just looping themselves and not necessarily caring for someone else, why you'd want to have a Nightscout site is just so you can go back and try to understand what's happening and why. So you can see the prediction change over time.
Kenny, how do you scroll backwards?
Yeah, so you along the bottom here, you click and drag, or if you're on your phone, tap and drag. Just drag across to your finger, and you can scroll backwards. And you see this, I'll go back a little further here. It'll scroll backwards, and this little window at the bottom slides with you. On your phone, it's kind of hard. It's small, so it's hard to be precise, but you can do that. And scroll backwards and take a look. So if you guys have a Nightscout site, I'd encourage you kind of have it open and flip back and forth with me trying to do this, but you can scroll back quite a ways. Now, one thing I will note is that because loading all this prediction information is pretty intensive for your phone or computer, they put a limit on how far back this data will load. So if you go back 24 hours, so it's 8:23 right now. If I go back to just before 8:23, there we go. You'll see that this loop pill over here kind of turns to this exclamation mark, this warning sign. The Nightscout site's not going to load all that prediction information back that far just because it's a lot of information to load. So you really can only look at 24 hours of loop information. You can look at your CGM data and the carb entries and all that. But once you get back here, 24 hours, more than 24 hours, things like this insulin on board pill and the carbs on board, if you're showing it, don't become useful because they don't actually update with the loop information. They update with Nightscout's own internal way of computing how much insulin you have on board, which is not really what's happening. So just know this information is not useful. Your tried and true information is always the loop pill if you're not sure which one to look at, and you can't go back more than 24 hours to look at like real-time predictions. Now you can go to the day-to-day report like we covered in the last video to look at information, but in terms of like what the prediction's doing, you really only have about 24 hours to work with. Okay. All right, so more pill hovering, and then we'll talk about the other stuff you can see on the graph here. So a couple of the pills we want to talk about is this one here is really important. This is the difference between the current reading, 129 in this case, and the previous reading, the one right before it. And again, you scroll back, you can see those as well. So it tells you kind of how fast the rate of change is. Fancy math word is like the delta, right? The change between the last reading and the current reading. So the last one was, you can probably do the math there, 128. That's useful. I use it all the time. I sort of use it as a measure of like, well, I find that more useful in the arrow because it will tell you a little more, a little faster. Now you can get jumpy sensors and don't want to always pin everything on that, but I like to use this information a lot, and I wish Dexcom would add it to their app. All right, insulin on board. We've talked about what that means in the last video, but it's usually pretty accurate. This pill is usually accurate, but if you're not sure, you always come over here to the Loop app, Loop pill. You can see that the IOB is actually 1.79 units, but the IOB on the right shows 1.8. So they're usually pretty close. But your source of truth is the Loop pill. Cage. So this is, we'll cover all the activities, but this is the cannula age. So C and then H, cannula age. So you can use this whenever, this will help you track like pump site changes, or in the case of an Omnipod, changing the actual pod. And when we go over the activities in a moment, you can see that you can add notes, and you see the notes show up here. See how it says notes left arm. I made a note of where I put it and logged it. Now it says it's 44 hours old, which is pretty accurate. Your Cage and Sage and other pills will be blank if you've never used them, or they'll say NA. Or if you hover over them or tap on the pill, they'll say something like the date might be from like 1979 or something like that. So if you've never used them, if you've never used the activities to turn them on, they'll be NA. Or if the last time you used it was a certain long time ago, it'll just kind of stop calculating. So when you do a site change, currently Loop doesn't log it into Nightscout for you. So we'll get to how to log these. But this is all manual. These pills in here are pretty much all manual when it comes to like age things, tracking how long things have been around is all manual at this point. There are shortcuts that you can use on the iPhones themselves to log some of these in Nightscout. Sometimes they end up being just notes, not actually triggering these pills, but you can take a look at those. I don't have an iPhone, just my daughter does, so I don't use the shortcuts a whole lot.
If you forget to put in your Cage or your Sage starting point, you can do that at any point.
Yeah, so we'll go, and we should just pull up activities. So you can, like pump site changes, the one that triggers the Cage update. This is the one where you can come in here and you can set the date and the time. So if you forgot to do it yesterday, then change the date to yesterday and about the time you did it. You can even go into Loop, like we've talked about before, and look at how old the pod is, or your site change. Well, I guess you would do site change, but you could look at the pod and you could go back and figure out when you changed it, so you could add the activity here. And in the notes, you saw me put left arm, and that's what would show up there. We'll get into that in a little bit. Sage is the sensor age, or your CGM sensor. So this is actually a really good time because I did a restart today. So if you hover over that, you can see a couple things. One, my transmitter ID, which I guess I should have taken a picture of and hidden, but that's okay. You can see the time I inserted it. So I used a couple different activities, and we'll review that in a minute. But you can see when we put the sensor in originally, which is on the 22nd, which was 10 days and 9 hours ago. And for those of you keeping track, the sensor's only good for 10 days, right? So, and then I added notes, and I put our start code, the lot number, and the transmitter ID, because those are the things that you need to restart or you need to call Dexcom, right? You can look at the last prime on Medtronic. Okay. Okay. Which, if you've only done that when you're setting up a new one, you could use that as your cage timer. Thanks, Glenn. Activities. Okay. We'll talk about that in a second. And then sensor start. So I just did a restart this morning. So I used the start activity, which we'll talk about in a second. The start treatment. And so that was at 11:05 this morning, and that's been running for 9 hours. So I can kind of tell like how long since the last restart. But what I really like is I get both the time since the last restart, which is 9 hours, because that's when it's going to, 10 days when it expires. But I also have a total duration here, so I can see how old the sensor is. If it's like 15, 16, 18 days old, maybe I won't replace it if it's getting a little spotty, that kind of stuff. So there you go. Hovering over basal gives you a bunch of stuff that sometimes doesn't get computed correctly because of us using loop. If you were using loop, it'd probably be fine, but it'll tell you what your current ISF is that you have set based on the time, what basal rate is running, and if it's something other than your scheduled basal. So right now what you're seeing is Tessa's scheduled basal. But if it was cutting back, I'll scroll back a little bit, you can see. Here, you'll get a T in front of, there we go. So you'll see a T colon, that means temporary basal. So this will show you her sensitivity at that moment in time, current basal rate it's running, and the current carb ratio, that kind of stuff. So when you see a T, it's running a temp basal of some kind. So there you go. And you get more information there when it's a temp basal. So you get all kinds of stuff there. Okay. Let's see. I don't have it on here because I don't have a Medtronic pump, but there's the BAGE or BAGE, which is battery age. So if you want to track how old the battery was in your pump, you could do that. There's another one called I don't know how else you'd say it. It's the iAge, which is the insulin age, which I think I must have turned off. Let me see. I think I just got a new vial of insulin. Okay. So iAge is more useful for someone on like a Medtronic pump that's going to switch out the cartridge, right? So this helps you track the last time you swapped out your cartridge if you use the insulin cartridge swap activity. I, just for fun, log the insulin vials because we have Omnipods. So I log every time we start a new vial. And so the vial is currently almost 5 days old. Let's see, what's another, anybody else got a favorite pill you want to cover? The pump pill doesn't tell you much. Battery pill is important because she needs to charge her phone, and I don't think anyone's doing that right now. This is a new one. I guess we'll talk about this one because it's new and the newer version of Nightscout. Is this database pill you can turn on, and it tells you your the size of your database, which is 167 megs of almost 500. And then the whole database file size is just the disk space. Don't worry about that one too much. But when it starts getting close to 500 megs, that's when you start looking at that whole MLab cleanup thing. Maybe you guys have seen in the Facebook group. You get to clean up your Nightscout data, which we can touch on if we have time. But this can be a nice way to kind of see when you're coming up on that space constraint, because the Nightscout starts getting weird and doesn't always log all the data, and sometimes causes red loops because the loop can't push the data to Nightscout and it's not received in an orderly manner. Then loop kind of locks up a little bit. So this is new in the new version here. So there we go. Okay, so let's go into the Nightscout menu. Okay. So in this menu, the 3 lines at the top, this is where you get to most of the other stuff. So you can see you have options. You can access reports, your profile editor, which is actually your pump settings, admin tools, some clocks, which people always look over. And then you have some settings down here too we'll go through. So again, it's covered in Loop Docs, but you can change what units it's using, date format, how big you want how you want the numbers and the graph to kind of look. So logarithmic is more like this dynamic one is more gonna give you a bigger spread where most of the dots are in the middle, hopefully. So you can kind of see the differences better. But as you get to the fringes, the dots will get a little more compressed. They might be 10 points apart from each other, but they'll look really close together. So if you want a nice evenly spaced graph, you would change it to linear. It would make everything more even. render basal. This one's really important because everybody misses it, and it's in the loop docs. And all the new Nightscout people don't turn it on. So what happens is normally this is not set, this render basal thing. Let me show you what that looks like. You guys have probably all seen screenshots of this in the group. See how there's no basal at the top here, no blue bars? That's sad. So especially if you're doing traditional looping where it's modulating the basal rates, you want to be able to see that. So make sure you come in here and set your render basal to something. Default makes the bars go down is off and up is on, and then higher basal rates would be up even higher. If you want to do icicle, that's the other way where like it clings from the top. So off is all the way up and higher basal rates are down. I know most people use default. I kind of like the icicle one because when you're using the temp basal rate functionality within Loop, but when the basal rates go higher, you're getting more insulin, right? So I like to kind of see the bars go down, like they're pushing down on the CGM numbers. So in my mind, it's like trying to push blood sugar down, but I don't know. I like to share that with people, but it's fun. Let's see. Oops. That's not what I wanted to do. Don't hit the little noisy thing here. This lets you test the alarm. Okay, so the other things in here would be alarms, enabling the alarms. Most of these are checked by default. You can uncheck them if you don't want it to be noisy. So like whenever I look at someone else's Nightscout site, I just turn these off right away so they don't alarm me when I'm looking at their site. You can have these by default turn on and off, but otherwise you just come into the menu and turn them on or off if you want them on or not. Night mode, it just makes everything kind of dim at a certain time of day. It's like 10 to 6. Makes everything a little darker so that if you have like an iPad or a phone with Nightscout on all night, for example, kind of near your bed, and it's not like super bright. You don't have to always turn the brightness down on your device all the time. And even then, turning the brightness down isn't always enough, right? So it just kind of makes everything a little dimmer. Edit mode, we won't worry about too much because when you're using Loop, all the data is coming from Loop. So you don't want to be in here messing with the carb entries and stuff too much. Custom title, you can, again, set this by default. So it's always set a certain way. But if it's usually by default, it starts with Nightscout unless you change it. So you can change it either here or in the Heroku settings, which we'll look at in a minute. Theme, some people get it stuck on default and that's kind of ugly. It's kind of like gray and boring like this, which I guess is okay, but I prefer the colors. So, you know, 2 colors. Then the plugins. Okay, so plugins are things we have to turn on when you're doing your setup in the Heroku settings. But just because you enable them, they're in that enable section, which I'll show you in a minute. That'll make them show up here as checkboxes. But if you want to actually see them in your graph, you have to go in here and check on these boxes and then click save. So I haven't done an override lately, but there is an override pill that will show up, and because I have this turned on, when an override is active, the override pill will show up in the top left. You can see my Sage and my Cage and my iAge and all these other ones and what basal rate is running because I have these turned on. If I turn one of them off, let's say sensor age, now it goes away. Goodbye sensor age, it's gone. I don't really need to see how old the insulin is, which is why I had it off. So there's that. So you can turn these on or off however you'd like them to look. But I'll show you just real quick because it's not always mentioned how you can set it up so that certain of these items here in the menu are always turned on or off. No matter what device you're connecting to for the first time, you don't always have to go in here and set it up, which is really nice if you're going to let another friend or family member or a school nurse use Nightscout. It's better to have all the settings where you would want it to be for them, so they don't have to go in here and learn how to go into this menu and turn things on and off. So I'll show you how to do that next.
Is this where you turn on a database pill?
Yeah, the right here, database size is the pill right here. Yep.
Is that in the latest version only?
As far as I know, maybe it's only in dev. I guess I could be wrong. Maybe it's in the dev version. I'm on the development version of Nightscout, which is 13.1. I believe the current master is 13.01 or something, 0.1.
Like Kenny, you're on that, right?
Yeah, so if you look at the versions at the bottom, which is good, you also see just above that, though, this authentication status. So if you haven't, if you can't see like the plus button, I'll show up here, and some other things, you need to be authenticated. So you have to enter your what's called API secret when you set up Nightscout. That's kind of like your site's password. Essentially, it lets you go in and change certain settings you couldn't change otherwise. So if you're not logged in on the device you're using, this will show you that you're not authorized. Or I can log out. I would log out by clicking remove, and it would pull that authentication off right now.
And by the way, Kenny, the database size is not on 13.0.1.
Oh, sorry, so guys. It's in dev. You'll get it eventually when it comes to master. Sorry. Thanks for that. You'll see the version down here that you're using, and then at the bottom here you get a bunch of these little links that most people don't look for, but they're here. So the Facebook group is CGM in the Cloud. It's right there at the bottom. The Nightscout webpage, where all the information is, Nightscout info. And then the check for updates button will help you, walk you through how to update Nightscout. And then just above that, the very first one is release notes. If you want to see what's been going on GitHub, it'll take you to the GitHub page, and you can look at some of the recent changes. So I click on this, actually. You can see that it takes you to the releases page, 13.01 catch-up. So their naming convention is around food, and every version starts with A, B, C. It's the first letter, all the way down to version 13, which letter 13 is K. So we're on catch-up. So that's fun. It's kind of like Android names their versions out of after desserts. So there's that. Again, moving letters down each version. So yeah, here's all the release notes for what happens, what they changed. Yeah. Big things in this release, just to highlight, are I'm not sure they listed much, but big performance improvements. They kind of rewrote everything. So the code that actually draws all the graphs was redone. And then they have some support for Alexa and Google Home. So you could yell at your device and have you tell you certain stats from Nightscout about your blood sugar or whoever you're checking on. Z3 library is the performance thing. And that's, not a big deal after that. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So
one comment, Kenny,
yes,
is if you are looking at other people's Nightscout site, and they have an alarm go off, don't silence it, because it turns off the alarm for everybody. So if they were wanting to use the alarm,
good point.
Don't silence it.
Yeah, so just come in here real quick in the menu and uncheck all the alarms, and then go down and click save, and then it'll stop beeping at you. And then you won't be messing them up if they were expecting an alarm. Okay, so let's real briefly take a look at the settings. So here in Heroku, so this is where you guys are setting up your actual Nightscout site to live. Again, you're following the directions. Let me know when that's visible enough for you. There we go. Okay, so when you go into Heroku, you'll see these tabs here. Once you tap on your site name, you'll have the overview, resources, deploy, blah, blah, blah. Last one is settings. You might go here a lot as you're tweaking things. So go to settings, and then there'll be a button that I already clicked called show config bars, and it turns to this button hide once you hit show. And it lists all the configuration variables for the site. And it uses these to kind of set the defaults or what they'll do. And I have more than normal because I've looked them up in the Nightscout documentation and added a few. Let me highlight a couple of them for you. So the main one, it's in Loop Docs, and it tells you which things. I guess maybe I'll bring up the Loop Docs page so you can see it too, because you guys have seen these before. Is let's say we're setting up a brand new one, and we'll go to step 4. Okay. So you have this in the Loop Docs where it says enable, and it tells you to paste basically this stuff right here. Each one of these words is a feature that you're turning on in Nightscout. So bridge is the bridge connection to Dexcom share. Loop is the loop pill and the loop prediction and everything kind of around that's unique to loop. This is the pump one, the IOB pill, the carbs on board pill, right? You can kind of figure out what all these are. So these are the recommended ones currently in Loop Docs for the enable. No commas, nothing else like that. So good to know that's what that's for. So if there's something like a new feature that got added, like they just added override not too long ago, you want to make sure you have it in there. The other place to look though, at the bottom when you go into the settings a little lower, the setup tells you what to put inside this show plugins right here. So show plugins is basically when I come into this menu and it right here, see how it says show plugins? I know it's very, very cleverly named. Show plugins is for showing plugins. So this will turn, if you have that feature listed in the show plugins section, it will turn this on by default. So when you load this site on any device for the first time, it will turn these on for you. So if you want to set up your thing with everything turned on, if you're like me and you log into Nightscout on like 5 or 6 different devices or whatever, or again, if you're going to hand it out, like we mentioned, you can turn these on so they stay on for that person or anyone that loads your Nightscout site. So if you want Insulin on board to always show, put IOB in the show plugins section. If you want the loop pill to always show, that's a good one. Make sure loop is in there. I did not get mine out to show you my list, but that's what you want here. So if you want Care Portal to show up, like these are good ones, recommendations here to always show. But you may want what probably should be added here, I just realized, since things have changed, you might want to add override. You want the override pill to always be on. And then the basal, you probably want the basal rate. I like to see this basal rate icon over here to be shown. So I think that should be probably in the show plugins, for example. So some of these other defaults are here too. But so show plugins is what you want to turn on in that plugin section all the time. Very nice to use. We got alerts enabled and all that. Okay, let me go back to my picture. All right, so your alarms are set here. They have the alarm as their first one here, the first word. So normal, this alarm here is referring to how long, because remember Nightscout was primarily built for collecting CGM data. So the alarm here is talking about how long ago has it been since you've gotten some CGM readings. So I have it set to 30 minutes. And a warning, like an urgent one is 30 minutes, that's the red. And then the yellow is the warning at 16 minutes. This is a fun one.
Can I
yeah, go ahead.
For a quick second? There's some people on here who don't have Nightscout up and running or haven't started it or don't have any idea. So just as, I know you said it, but let's say it again, what you're showing right now is part of what you set up when you are building Nightscout. Yes,
yes. So the here's the page for new Nightscout users, and it walks you through how to create a Heroku account. And there's a fabulous video right at the top of the new Nightscout users one, which is how to build it. And Katie walks through all of these steps with the doc open and all the web pages you need to go to do this. In a video, she records her screen and does the whole thing. So don't feel overwhelmed by setting this up. I'm just showing you around how to get through it. So I definitely don't want to take you through it because it's great. I used it too. So yeah, cool. Here's a fun bonus one that people don't mention all the time that I had to dig around for. This is called alarm types, and if you add the word predict in there, what it will do, and I think I had a screenshot, I didn't save it, sorry. What it will do is it will, if it sees kind of a trending, like within the next, I think it's about 15 minutes is its window it's looking at. So based on the trend of your dots, if you're gonna go low, let's say, usually low is the one you see it for. If you're gonna cross 70 or 55 within 15 minutes, based on the speed of the change, it will trigger a Nightscout alarm as well. Like you're not low yet, but it's letting you know that you could be or will be low or even predicted high. You can have that one on as well. So the predict one's pretty cool. I have something similar. It's a little more advanced on Xtrip that we use on my phone. But the Nightscout predicted alarm is a really cool one because, you know, if you're falling quickly from like 150 to 120 and dropping at 20 or 30 points every time, you're going to get a warning well before you're actually low. Whereas if you wait for the low, you guys all know this, you know, if you're falling at 20 points every single reading, by the time you get the low alarm, you're probably pretty stinking low. So the prediction one's really nice. to have on. AR2, I don't really know. I mean, it's useful for the prediction is what it's done, but as a loopers, we care about the predicted curve here. So the AR2 is found over here in the little dots next to the hours, and it's, you guys have probably seen it. It's the like blue, the blue dot here, the blue lines. Usually it's like a mouth. It's got like a range. I turn that one off. But here's the other important one that's not mentioned in loop docs that I hope Katie approves my PR on is basal render. So you see this basal underscore render. You can set this to default or to icicle, and it will turn on this piece right here. So this would solve, I would say, a lot of problems with people who start with Nightscout is they don't follow the instructions all the way through to actually turn this part on, which is like step 7. They stop at like step 5 because the site's up and running. So turn on your basal, but how you like it to show. And again, if you set this value, basal render, to either default or icicle, then it will be on for anyone that goes and looks at your Nightscout. Selfishly, it would keep me from having to click so many times to set everything up when someone shows me their Nightscout site. But here you go. So basal underscore render is a fun one to add. We talked about the colors of the dots. This is done by BG high, BG low, and target bottom and top, right? So the green is anything between the targets, and between target and low or high is yellow, and above high or below low is red. So you guys can set that however you'd like. Another one I'll show that's kind of unique. Some people, you guys experience this where Loop is checking for new CGM values. So you see that I got an update 6 minutes ago. It should update any minute because I see I got a Loop update recently. This is how long ago it got the CGM value. And for some of you, you might be experiencing a situation where you have to wait about 7.5 minutes between each reading. And the reason is Nightscout by default looks out for a new CGM reading every 5 minutes. So if it missed it kind of at that 5-minute mark, like let's say Loop hadn't, or Dexcom hadn't uploaded it to share just yet, like it's off by like 30 seconds or so, it's not going to try again, sorry, 2.5 minutes. It'll try in 2.5 minutes. So that means if you missed it at minute 0 or minute 1, it's not going to try again until 2.5 minutes into that 5-minute reading cycle. So you might always be 2.5 minutes behind looking at your CGM value. And that gets, especially when you're watching a kid, it gets rather annoying. So what you can do, it uses a little more cycles on your site, but I have never had it, you know, push a limit on Heroku. You can change the bridge interval, bridge underscore interval, to this is a minute. So this is 60,000 milliseconds. So you can change it to how often. You can do it every 30 seconds if you wanted to. But this basically makes Nightscout check for a new reading from Dexcom share every minute instead of 2.5 minutes. So it's like not perfect, but it's a little bit better. These other ones here, like bridge max count and bridge minutes, these are like how many readings to go back and grab if you're missing any, and how far to look back for missing readings. So basically I said if I'm missing readings, like somehow you're like in airplane mode or something, or away at camp and you don't have signal all the time, and you want your Nightscout site to be relatively complete, like the geek that I am, I want all my data in Nightscout, you can tell it to go back and look further for missing data points and share. So once you do get all those uploaded, it'll backfill all those dots. I think by default, Nightscout only backfills a couple of dots. So this is a little extreme, but 144, I think, is 12 hours? Or is it how many readings you have in a day? I can't remember. But there you go. And custom title is the name you want to show up all the time, so having to change it. And here's the enable line, which you guys have seen in the settings. And pump alerts. There's some other cool ones in here. I forget which ones I turned on. Oh yeah, Sage enable alerts. So this one, if you want it to alarm you when your sensor gets to be a certain age, like if you don't just want to look at the Dexcom app, like for parents like myself, my Dexcom Follow doesn't have a reminder when the sensor is going to expire, right? So if I turn on Sage enable alerts and I set Sage urgent and warning, these are the number of hours. So basically like at 9 and like 9.5 hours, I think is what I have it set out here. it will make an alarm on Nightscout, and it'll tell me that the sensor is about to expire or something like that. So I have 2 different warnings that show up on day 9 of the sensor to let me know that it's expiring in case for some reason I didn't know that was happening. So for those of you that wish you had a sensors expiring warning in Dexcom Follow, this is how you get it. You do it Nightscout. Show forecasts of loop, I think, is already in the settings when you set it up. That shows that prediction line. And that's it. There's some other stuff in here, the frames, that's all new. So menu. We talked about most of these things here. What I want to show you is you have the reports, you have the profile editor. Make sure the clocks, because they're quick. So under clock view, you can click the clock, the color clock, or the simple clock. I like the color clock. Very simple, creates a color in your threshold if you're above your target. Again, same color as the dots. Changes the color, tells you what the current arrow is and the current blood sugar. This is useful if you want it up on a computer screen or an iPad, or I actually should have a picture of it, sorry. I know I do have one. As I have an old Android phone that I stuck to the wall, but then now I changed it. I use one of those pop sockets and like a pop socket holder that sticks on the wall. And I put it on the phone, and I put it on the wall, and the only thing that phone does is it just shows Nightscout. And I used to have it just show this clock. Just so it's in the kitchen where my wife can see it, or I can see it over cooking dinner. I don't have to worry about looking down at our watch or whatever. You can just look up and see it. Or if someone's over taking care of the kids, they can just kind of glance over and see it as well. So kind of fun to have. There we go. So there's a couple of different clock options here. I forget what the other ones are. This one's a little more subtle with the actual time on it. Yeah, okay, clocks, those are fun. You can imagine all kinds of fun things you could do with it. So fastest one to use is admin tools. This is quick. So admin tools, if you go in here, you can, like, these are not really secure. I should just delete these. But you can make different tokens for giving people different access. I actually don't have it set up to work right now, but you could, in theory, limit people's access to different areas of Nightscout. I tried it, and I have to turn on some things, and I haven't done it yet. Profile editor. This is important because in the newest versions of Loop, version 2 and up, it actually loads your pump settings, basically, into Nightscout. There's a couple of bugs, but for the most part it works. Into here. So you can see your carb ratios and sensitivity and basal rates and your targets. So that's super cool because someone else could see it if you wanted to show them. This is also, I print this to give to our endo as like a pump settings printout because it's not convenient to do from within Loop. This gets most of this stuff. It doesn't have like your max basal limits, your max bolus limits, those kinds of things, but it has the important stuff.
Why does carbs say 0?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So in Nightscout and in Xtrip and a few other tools, it might even be some of the open APS systems, I don't know, but they use this idea that is carb activity over absorption rate. So like how many grams of carbs per hour your body could process. So that's how they, instead of guessing absorption time, which is what we do in Loop, instead it creates a threshold for how many grams of carbs you could potentially absorb in an hour. So like if it's a big meal, it would take longer, right? So if you ate a bunch of food that would only take 2 hours to consume, to kind of work through your system, 2 to 3 hours. If you ate a lot of it, it would take a lot longer to do it. That's the idea. So like a big meal. So we don't use that feature. So when Loop uploads the data into the profile, it just leaves it at 0. The other cool thing is this creates like a backup for you. Or if you want to see what you did, like, oh, I messed with the settings, I can't remember what I did. You can come up here to the database records section, and you can pick the last time you made a settings change. I don't think I made changes like this often, but anytime Loop uploaded the profile, you can flip back to, a while ago. And you have to be logged in to do this with your API secret, but it can load your previous settings. So I got rid of these 2 basal rates at some point. So it's kind of like a backup for what you did. Carb ratios are actually a little bit different too, just last week. So you can kind of look at your old settings, what you did before. Odds asking why is the DIA to the 5.1666667. Again, that's one of the bugs I see currently in between Nightscout and Loop. I don't think Loop's uploading data to Nightscout perfectly well right now. So you're getting these weird rounding errors, like 4.6 was supposed to be 4.5, and I changed my DIA to 5. This is 5.1 and change. So some things to be worked out, bugs to be reported I haven't done yet. I don't think anybody else has done either. Time zone doesn't fill out, and I think that's actually causing a bunch of other problems that we'll talk about later. But yeah, so
on the duration of insulin activity, can you change it there?
if you change anything here in Nightscout, it will not change anything in Loop. So next time Loop uploads, it'll just erase it with whatever it's uploading. So yeah, good question. Yeah. So there we go. So yeah, backups of your settings. Again, it's not all settings. It's not your max bolus and basal and things like that, but or overrides. But you can, if something happens and your phone gets erased or your Loop app gets deleted or whatever, you have access to a backup of your settings to some degree, which is super useful. Also really great now that it does this because it's much easier to help people with their settings. If they give you their Nightscout site, now I can go in and look at what their settings are. So it was more abstract before, so much nicer. Any questions on the profile editor? I only saw the one. Okay, cool. I see Dale Bull has one of the triangle with an asterisk. That's probably not good if it's always like that. COB pill always reads 0. You know, I found that it reads 0 a lot, which is probably why I turned it off, actually. It's not at the moment, which is cool, but a lot of times it's not. So these pills don't always load right just because of the way that they've sort of like jammed Loop functionality into Nightscout. It wasn't originally intended to be like have an external source like Loop overriding all its information. So that's why you can get some quirkiness there. Okay, admin profile reports and show plugins. All right, so let's cover Care Portal. So I showed you where the reports are. We'll go over them in a minute. The Care Portal. So that's one of the show plugins here. That's recommended to be turned on, Care Portal. It adds this little plus at the top right. You have to be logged in to use it. So you have to have your API secret entered. Okay. So now this is where you create events. So that's what it calls events. So you could, in theory, come in here and do a bolus, right? You could enter carbs, you could enter insulin and log it in here. But again, if you put anything in Nightscout, it's not going to go back to Loop. So, but this can be useful if you wanted to treat a low, or you give an injection because your pod was leaking or your site was leaking, and you weren't sure if you should be including the insulin in Loop or not. You could at least log it in Nightscout here, and then come back and add it back into Apple Health or whatever it is you're going to do with it later. But at least for right now, you don't have to remember when you did it and how much. You can just log it in Nightscout, move on with your life, and if you feel like you need it, you can come back and look for it in here. So you can log these things. You can log a BG check, which shows up as these little red dots here. You see in our graph today when we're doing our restart. So these are the BG checks. Other fun thing to do is if you're using Xstrip on your phone, you can have it read your Bluetooth enabled meter and upload directly to Nightscout for you, because I didn't log any of these. My phone did it for me, so that's fun. But you guys aren't using Xstrip, you're all loopers. So you can log that. I actually didn't put any in today. Let's see, I'll add one right now. The other fun one is to, especially if you're doing some analysis, you want to go back and look at your day, or want to learn from what's happening. I think it was right before dinner, so I'll log it. I think it was like here. What time is this? 5:41. Okay, so you can log things like exercise. So let's do exercise. She was outside playing with her siblings for about, like an hour with her. Yeah, let's call it an hour, 75 minutes or something. So she did this for 75 minutes, and I'll just say playing outside. And we'll start it at 5:41 today and submit. It'll ask me, am I sure? I say yes, always ask that. And then you'll see this activity load eventually. Underneath that time, there it is. There's a bar down here that says playing outside. I can hover over it, and if I had put any notes, which I did, I could see it as well. And you can kind of see that this, I think it did a little too long. Oops, sorry. Math on the fly, not working so well. So excuse me. You can see kind of where the activity was, or the exercise was. Overrides will show up the same way. They'll show up as bars down here on the bottom with the name of the override, and if you hover over it, it will show you what percent change you used or target you used, if you were changing the target and or the insulin need percentage. So you can, they'll show up in the same section at the bottom with your notes. So this is an exercise note, but you can also just do regular old notes, and notes can also have a duration of time. So you don't have to use the exercise one, you can use just regular old notes. So there's that. I use these for all kinds of things, mostly playing and exercise type things if I want to make notes of things. But occasionally I'll just log that it's a compression load, just so I remember when I look back later that there wasn't anything wrong with the basal or anything, it's just a compression low. You can also tell it's a compression low because she's perfectly flat with no insulin on board, like right here, her insulin on board is 0 pretty much. And then you see when it comes back, it's at the same level. It actually starts to go up, partially because she turned off basal. So usually I'll log those so you can make notes, those kinds of things. While I'm over here, also note that when you do a suspend or a resume activity, that can also be done manually in Loop, but also when you do a pod change or site change, or is changing your basal rates, because what it does is it sends a suspend, it changes your basal rates in the pump, and then it resumes again. You'll see these gray dots as well. So notes that don't have a duration show up as these little gray circles. But one of the things that also shows up is the resume and suspend. So if you're not sure when you changed your pod or when you changed basal rates in the last day or so, you can come here and you can kind of see it. Like if you didn't put the cage in the right spot and you don't have the phone available, if you're a caregiver like me, you don't have the phone available or you don't want to go get it, to look at when you did the pod change, you can just scroll back to Nightscout and look when these kind of gray dots show up, the suspend and resume activities. And you can say, oh, I throw the cage time somewhere in here. So that's a really quick caregiver tip there.
Can you add event types, or does it, whatever's not there, you put in?
Oh, good question. Okay, so most of these are here by default. A few of them show up when you turn on certain features. So if you have Open APS as one of your enable thingies, it'll show a target change option. If you have override enable, which is needed for not just showing the override pill, but also for enabling remote override. You'll see this temporary override and temporary override cancel activity. So a few of these activities are triggered by the enable, but the rest of these are all just kind of built in and you can't really add your own. If you got really crazy before you were looping, you could have done temp basal logs, which I did, which was crazy, but
and what does announcement do?
Announcement, for us, I don't think it does much. I think the announcement, I don't know for sure, is used for when you announce your carbs in Open APS, but you don't want to actually log them. You just say, I'm starting a meal. I think that's what that is, but I honestly don't know. It's newer, I think. Combo bolus is newer too. That's new. That wasn't there before. Yeah, that's fun. Snack bolus, meal bolus, exercise, questions. I guess you could, maybe announcements and questions can be used for communicating to other people. My wife and I used Nightscout well before we used Loop as a way to communicate what was done, largely tracking insulin given before we had something like Loop to track insulin on board and all of that. So this is a good way to keep track of someone else, as well as coming in here looking at your own information. So the Sage one, this is a good one. So I showed you before how we did a restart today, which was very convenient. Sage. So I use 2 different activities for sensors. I do the CGM sensor insert, which you see here, CGM sensor insert. It's not alphabetical, I know, I'm sorry. But CGM sensor insert is the one I use for a brand new sensor actually inserting into the body, is the way I remember it. And then CGM sensor start, you can do one right away when you push the start button. That's fine, but it's not really needed. I only use sensor start now for when we do a restart. Because think of it this way, you're not actually taking the sensor out, and so it's still inserted, but you are going through the process of the Dexcom app of eventually hitting start sensor. So the start or insert starts the counter over again, and as long as you leave the same insert activity going, you get this, where you get the duration showing the whole time the sensor's been inserted in the first, so the second line there, and then the sensor start is the last time I restarted it. So it's been restarted for 10 hours. So super helpful for figuring out how long the sensor's actually been in there. I guess partially useful because, you know, if you want to like break a record or something, like I was tracking for a while, but mostly just to know how old the sensor is. Okay, so care portal we've covered, must be authenticated, notes, exercise, pump site change. So temporary overrides, this is for remote overrides. You can set a temporary override, and what happens is once you've gone through the process of setting all this up, which I won't cover here, all your preset overrides sync up into Nightscout, and you can pick one, right? So you can pick one to use. But a fun tip you don't always know about is you can pick an override, and then you could actually tell it how long you want it to run. So even if it's an indefinite override or one with a set time, like our going low one is set to 60 minutes, it fills it in here, but I can change this. I can make it 85 minutes. I can make it 30 minutes. And it will tell Loop to run that override for that specific amount of time. So that's always nice, especially if you think you're going to set like a higher override to try to combat some carbs maybe that weren't entered for your child. But you don't want to forget to turn it off later, especially if they're going to do like another carb entry. You don't want to have a really high carb ratio. You can just turn it on for 20 or 30 minutes or something, and it'll time out on its own. And then cancel is just what it sounds like. It just cancels whatever override's running for whatever reason. Okay, what else we got? Reports. Reports, and then we're done. I think we've covered enough. Bore you guys to death on a Wednesday night. Okay, reports. So menu, reports. Okay, so we've gone over the day-to-day, which you need to check the IOB and the COB for, because that's amazing information. That's great. Predictions isn't super helpful, but whatever. So all these are great. We've talked about how to use this report a little bit. Week to week kind of gives you a snapshot of just like big stats. To load here, sorry. Sometimes it's a little slow. All right, so this is kind of like the most similar to the spaghetti graph, sometimes referred to in Dexcom Clarity, where it shows each day individually. It doesn't have that cool feature where like you mouse over like one line and the rest of them kind of hide. That's kind of nifty. But here you can just kind of see each day, which I prefer. Again, I prefer to see individual days rather than trends because not everything happens at the same time, but that's just me. So week to week is basically overlaying days on top of each other. Daily stats is each day kind of how you did in terms of like what you've defined as low and high, and normal is how much your time in range in the middle basically. Oh, that's my answer right there. Okay, so 144 from earlier, the bridge is 12 hours, 288 readings in 24 hours. Your highest and lowest, standard deviation for the day, all that kind of fun stuff with your lovely green circles. And again, you can set your date ranges up here or have the quick like 3 months or 2 weeks or whatever. It's all up here. And the distribution is going to be like your sort of like your overview report from Clarity. A lot of you guys look at, which should be your, and again, it's using the high and the low you've defined up here. So it'll tell you those stats as well. Based on the data that's in, you got your A1C, your standard deviation overall. Again, this is a little confusing. The overall is down here. And then like these sort of breaks down the numbers within each bucket. Like in the low section, what was your standard deviation? So we didn't have like big swings and lows. What your standard deviation was just for the dots inside that target range. And then when high, your average number. So we're apparently averaging the 100 when we're in range. That's great. Our average low was 64. Our average high was 167. So not too terrible. A bunch of other data down here that I don't really always use. I mean, it's kind of cool to look at, and I try to look at what people consider good, which is cool. You can Google it and read some cool reports and things along those lines. There's a good article linked down here at the bottom that tells you about some of these stats down here, these variability stats. And not everybody reads it, but it's down there and it's really interesting. Hourly is sort of, or a percentile chart either way. It's kind of like the graph. And clarity, you guys, maybe your endos like to look at. I don't think they're useful, but whatever. So this will tell you by hour, kind of the breakdown, which I think the Dexcom looks a little nicer, but you know, it's all there by hour if you care about that. Now what success is. Oh yeah, so by week, again, high level stats like you saw with the daily stats, but this is by week. So if you did like, probably take a little longer to do a month, but you have to see multiple weeks kind of next to each other, how you did on the week level. You're probably not logging calibrations in Nightscout, so so setting that isn't really going to be helpful. Treatments, though, this is a cool report that you guys probably should know about. This is all the entries that go in here. So let me just run today. That's all you really need. There's gonna be a lot. Every time you run a temp basal, which is a lot in loop, right? Every time there's a bolus, if you're doing automatic bolus, you'll have every bolus in here. So the reason why I highlight this is for a couple reasons. If you end up having some kind of thing where the bolus didn't go through, but it's still logged in loop and loop still thinks it's there, and you go in and say you delete it in Apple Health or you delete it in the loop app, but it's still showing up in Nightscout. How do you get rid of it from Nightscout if you got to delete it in all the places it goes? You come in here and you find the bolus you wanted to remove and you click the little X here and it'll ask you if you want to delete it and you can say okay. So if anything gets logged in Nightscout from loop that you're having to like fix, is pretty rare, but you can delete it or edit it from here. Also, if like I made a note, an exercise note, here it is, that ran for too long, I should probably change the time to like 45 minutes instead of 75 minutes. I can come in here and change it or edit the note or whatever it is, change the time I entered it, that kind of stuff. Oh, it was like 4, that's what it was. I just put the wrong time, to 60 minutes. So now I can save it and make the change. And then, oh, I have to close out of reports to get to it, sorry. Then it'll change it on my Nightscout graph. So you can come in here and fix things. If you entered an exercise entry or a note entry and you forgot to change the PM back to AM or whatever, you can't see it. I've done that multiple times. Come in here and find it, and you can delete it or edit it. So it's a little awkward. You can't just easily edit things in Nightscout, but this is where you come to do that. You go to the treatments report, and you try to find the thing that needs to be fixed. Most often notes or a pump site change or a sensor insert activity that you put in here and it's wrong because you forgot the time was wrong or something. So come in here, find it, and edit it. The filtering by event types isn't super great. No, I didn't do a pump site change today. We did a sensor start. I don't think it even works most of the time, which is sad. Actually, what it does is if you're searching multiple days for a pump site change, if I remember how this works right now, is it will show you data for the entire day of all the days that you did a pump site change. So I looked for the last 2 weeks that we did pump site changes. I'd have blocks of activities, but it'd only be the days that there was a pump site change somewhere in that day. It would be nice if it just filtered down to those activities specifically, which is what you'd think it would do, but it doesn't. So treatment reports, there you go.
Real quick question back on calibrations. If you were curious and you entered your calibrations, would it show you the distance from the actual CGM data?
I don't know. I haven't actually messed with it very much.
Sorry.
How does it know? How does it know that I? Oh, sensor start. Look at that. Huh.
Okay.
I did notice I calibrated. How fun. You can enter it. I think it will give you some meaningful data here actually if you're calibrating. So this was more built for the days before the G6 where you're calibrating more often. I have seen people have this filled out, but we've only ever used the G6 and I don't enter my calibrations into Nightscout. I just do them. So.
Okay, so the question on treatment, is there a way to export the treatment report into a
CSV?
CSV
That's
file?
a great question. I wish. I mean, you could probably, I think I've tried to highlight these and drop them into Excel, and I think they paste okay in there. But as a nice, convenient CSV, no, I think the only way to really get data out of here into a CSV is to go into MLab. And you have to go do an export, which is, I figured it out and I've done it a couple times, but I couldn't do it in front of you. I'm not that good.
The answer here is also copy and
Not,
paste.
not easy, yeah.
Okay.
Profiles will show you your history of profiles like we talked about on the profile editor. You can come back and look at what it was on a certain day and it'll load it up for you. Loopalizer I don't use. I know it's a newer report, but we can take a look at it together. It does show you similar data to what you see in the Loop app, kind of when temp basals go up and down and when boluses happen. But because I'm using the auto bolus, you're only going to see lower basal rates. So this is like the 0.2, how negative it goes, all the way up to 0. Those are the temp basal deltas. So because it's not going up, right? So you see the ups and the downs if you were using traditional Loop. And you can see that here. So you get to see, basically it's like a, it's a snapshot of what the Loop app looks like in terms of ups and downs of basal rates, how much IOB you're carrying, and carbs on board you're carrying, active carbs. Sort of what we look at on the day-to-day report when you check those boxes. That's all here as well. So I mean, it's useful information. I just find the day-to-day report a little more useful. The black dots are the boluses, and the bars up here is how much insulin on board there is. So this can be a really good report if you want to pick a couple of days to show your endo, if they want to kind of see what Loop's doing other than the day-to-day report. You could use this one too.
So two more questions. One from Carrie's Mac, so I guess that's Carrie. I'm looking everywhere for a way to see a report that will print out the food and emojis so that I can keep a record or copy it into Excel.
Yeah, not gonna happen. I've tried to. So what I used to love about Nightscout is when we would log the food before Loop, and we do it on our Xtrip app or here in Nightscout, is we would make notes about what food we had. I might even go back later if the meal went really well and I like hashtag win or something like that, or hashtag nailed it or something I'd remember, and I could search Nightscout for the last time I found the word pancakes and hashtag win, and or black bean muffins or something we made that's more unique, and I could find where that happens. Everyone now says, oh, use the Typeable mobile app. I don't want another site to go searching through for that nonsense. I wish it was here, Carrie. I'm sorry. I probably just need to try and code it myself, honestly. I could probably be motivated enough to do just that one, where we could add, like, if you have a Nightscout URL entered into your Loop settings, it'd be great if on the carb entry screen it added like a notes option. So when you save it, it would go into Nightscout and you could log what food you were eating, and not like the emojis are not helpful. They're visual for 48 hours, but they're not helpful for looking anything up. So I find them more frustrating than cute, you know. So there you go. That's my insight into how I feel about carb entries. Okay, so endo. Okay, so the last thing I'll cover is what to give your endo. I'll just tell you what I do. Someone's trying to get in my room. Okay. So what I do is I print out a copy of the profile editor, which is the pump settings. And then in the reports, I like to give like a week or two of the day-to-day with the nice IOB and COB. And the reason is, as we've discussed in our last one, why I think that's like super amazing information is the insulin on board, but also how long the carbs are going to last. I think that's more relevant data than endos are used to getting, so I'm more like training our endo to like read this a little bit better. This gives you pretty much all the variables you need to look at any given day about how the day went. So, you know, they're not used to seeing carb entries with meaningful numbers. I guess that fast isn't slow, but I think day-to-day report gives some really good information. I'll make it a little bigger and then print it, or take a scrolling screenshot if you have a fancy screen capture software like I do. So I'll do the day-to-day for like a week or two, and I'll usually like make notes from myself. You can see the notes show up at the top. Like if I want to show her how sick days have been going, because she can't find them in our graph, which I've talked about before too. So like highlighting those kinds of things. If you actually want help, I imagine most of you aren't asking for help from your endo if you're looping. So if you just want to give them some information and train them a little bit, I like the day-to-day report. Day-to-day report, profile editor, and then Tidepool is useful. I don't know, I don't want to sound too let's see. I need to get a new window here. Login .tidepool. Oh, sorry, app.tidepool.
So while you're doing that, there's a question about, is there a way to see how much total basal insulin is delivered and when?
Yeah, so that's what I'm pulling up this for, because endos, I don't know. If you ask my opinion, I think basal bolus ratios are baloney, and so it's not really a useful metric to even look at, but they can't help themselves. So because they can't help themselves, you cannot use the insulin distribution in Nightscout. I'll show that to you right now. These summary stats over here on the right that shows up here. There it is. So bolus insulin, negative temp, and basal insulin. So all these things are over here, especially for those who are using traditional looping with the basal rate modulation. The amount of basal insulin given in a Nightscout report in this section is not accurate. It's assumed that when the rate is running, like a certain basal rate is running, that it's evenly distributed across all minutes. So let's say it only ran for 5 minutes, but we know that in some lower situations, it may not have even delivered anything. But it assumes that, all that insulin, that rate was given every single minute, even though maybe a delivery didn't even happen, no click of insulin was delivered. So it's going to overestimate how much insulin is being delivered through basal. So if you want accurate numbers in terms of what your total daily dose is, and which is actually a useful number, right? And bolus basal balance, you need to go somewhere else to Tidepool, because the data gets logged into Apple Health and goes from Apple Health to Tidepool. So Loop is logging exactly how much is delivered in those basal rate changes, even if it's nothing. But Tidepool has that information. So it gets it from Apple Health, and so where is it? This is your other stats, but where's the copy as text has a lot of it. Basics. I forget where now. Sorry.
It's on the daily screen.
Daily.
Click on
screen.
daily. It's on the
you.
right.
Okay, yeah. So total insulin for the day is 15. So you can scroll back and check these here. If I go back to trends, do copy as text and run Notepad, you guys can see that. Gives you some information here. All this information you saw there, you can kind of like throw into a message to your endo if you want. That's fun. It's not date of birth. That's weird. Okay. So yeah, you can kind of see all those stats, but then your PG log, it'll log your blood sugar. If you've entered them in Apple Health, they'll be here. Sometimes endos like to know that you're checking. So there's that. And then daily shows your total daily dose by the day. So you can kind of get that. How much is bolus, how much is basal. But your TDD is accurate inside Tidepool. So I'll grab a screenshot of like this screen here, or I'll pick a day. Oh, this is average. Okay, good. There it is. Yeah, 19.2 for that day. So I'll grab like a screenshot of this data because the total daily dose is accurate. If they had insulin on board listed here, then I'd be a fan, but it doesn't. So also not useful. But it's, again, how much is delivered per basal click or per basal rate change is accurate in Tidepool. So that's where you would go to get that for your actual total daily dose. So you'd see this says like 15 to 19 is kind of a normal day for Tessa. And on this report, again, the numbers might be similar, but they're gonna be way different because I don't use I'm using auto bolus, so they're a little closer to right. But when you're not using auto bolus, you're using the normal basal rate modulation in Loop, it can be really high. Like it was showing like 22 to 23 units per day, but she was only using about 18. So it can be off. So yeah, there we go. The Nightscout reporter link that Odd listed, yeah, is fine. I don't know. It's fine. Basal bolus ratio. Okay, everyone, if you're going to ask me, I'm going to tell you don't pay attention to any of it. It doesn't matter because Loop is delivering it. The basal bolus is in Nightscout or in Tidepool is how Loop gave you the insulin. It's not how much is really your basal insulin and how much is really your bolus insulin, right? So a true basal bolus ratio would be you have your basal rates and they run all day long, and that's a certain amount of insulin, and then you add up all the boluses on top of that, and then that's your basal to bolus ratio. But Loop is just giving you more and less insulin, and it's either using temporary basal rate functions or small boluses in the case of autobolus to get you the insulin you need or to turn off the basal rate to take away insulin you don't need. So basal bolus ratios are even more useless with Loop, right? So just like they were useless before because it really matters. It changes for everybody. There's no like magic thing. I can tell you that from working with a bunch of people. No ratios to use, and it depends on what your diet is too. So it varies person to person and varies based on your diet, even within people that are similar. And when you're using an automated delivery system like Loop, it doesn't matter. It's all about how it got you the insulin, not the ratios don't matter at all. It's taken more than 6 months, and I think our endo might finally get the fact that basal and bolus ratios don't matter because it's how Loop gave the insulin. So hopefully that helps. Anybody else have some fun questions before we wrap up?
I think you stunned him, Kenny.
Sorry, that was a lot at once. It's just see what time basal was delivered and how much. Okay, so that is in, if you want to see like at a particular moment in time, you should be able to kind of hover over this bottom section of Tidepool. And it should tell you what the rate was. I don't know if it'll tell you exactly how much was delivered. If you want to see how much was delivered in a certain block of temp basal, you'd have to go into Apple Health and go back to that time and look at how much insulin Loop logged. Because it logs insulin every time it changes the basal rate. So once it changes to something else, then it would log how much was delivered with that, basal rate for the last 5, 10, 15 minutes. Does that help? If you really want to know, you got to go into Apple Health and go look at it. I don't know where you could find in a 5 or 10 minute block how much insulin was really delivered, other than doing the math by looking at the insulin on board. So
I think you did a great job.
I think we're good.
Thank you.
Do you have anything else, Joanne? You guys listed a bunch of stuff for me earlier that you wanted to make sure was covered. Do you have them?
We talked about Tidepool. I posted and
you had a great webinar.
Tidepool. And a lot of this ends up being what reports do you like to look at and how to, what's useful, and the endos, if they can.
You're going to train your endo, right?
Yeah, you're training your endo. If you want to see the same kind of reports, they see how your numbers look compared to what they're used to seeing.
Yeah.
So it's probably, for a lot of us, more useful to the endos than us. But it is a tool. It's a historical tool. I think Glenn uses it. I don't use it except when I think I have to. But most.
And you can give access to Tidepool to your provider most of the time if they'll take it. But you can also give them access to your Nightscout site. It just depends if they can use it. Sometimes policy doesn't allow them to use it. So like we work with Kaiser, and Kaiser doesn't allow them to click on external links or give an email address where I can let them see the Tidepool data. So because of that, I have to print out all the reports for them. I print them to PDFs, attach them to an email or the messaging system, and then send them.
My endo takes my reports, stick them in the file. He never talks to
me. Yeah, they just log them. They're there for historical purposes.
Yes.
So,
thank you, everybody. For those in other parts of the world, have a great day. For everybody else, sweet dreams. We'll talk to you real soon. Thank you so much.